Good afternoon and welcome to Finding the Plot. My name is Sebastian Whittington-Smythe. Now this might surprise you, but sometimes I play games for purely recreational reasons. To give my hands something to do while my brain deconstructs a more intellectually involving topic. Today's offering, Dust, an Elysian Tail, was one such game. One that I didn't expect to pique my interest on an academic level, and yet it provided me with an embarrassment of riches, a cornucopia of topics too numerous for one single video. That's where I had a problem. What one aspect of the game should I address? For there are many things that I could base an episode on. Should I talk about the way that Dust an Elysian Tail acknowledges many times that it is a game? Even going so far as to have collectible characters from other games making a cameo, while sometimes borrowing gameplay elements from the games that made them famous. For this could be seen to canonize all of these games together, leading to a video about their possible links, but that would be too easy and a bit unoriginal. Then there's the way that the game doesn't just acknowledge its influences, but actively slams them in your face so that you can't miss them. Even going so far as to blatantly nab elements of classic games, specifically for referential reasons. Such as this bit that has clearly been lifted from Castlevania 2.
Well, that made absolutely no sense.
Every moment has a purpose, Fidget. You just have to dig deeper.
This could open up a discussion about how the gameplay itself mirrors the themes of stronger than the sum of its parts that run through the narrative. That Dust is brazenly promoting a demanding acknowledgement of its influences is the opening salvo of an argument that we should not judge a game for its individual gameplay elements, nor for what it borrows from others, but instead look at the game for its own merits as a whole. For one could say that this problem of dismissal through categorization is too common, and hurting indie games. How often does one say, this game is basically Robotron, or it's another Metroidvania? Anyway, that topic again is far too obvious for you, my dear viewers. You're of a better breed than that. But then, what could I possibly talk about that is befitting of yours truly? And then, as I watched the cinematic marvel Caligula, it hit me. I held my glass aloft and declared, "Grover, I have run out of wine." After he refilled my glass and I paid more attention to the film, I realised that in Dust and Elysian Tail, the protagonist, Dust, is actually the villain, and it's all because of ancient Rome. So, recline in your villa, gaze upon my video, and command your pet eunuch to pour you the finest vin, as we find the plot of Dust and Elysian Tail. For those of you who have not played Dust or do not remember the plot, allow me to summarise. Dust, our playable character of the piece, awakens with no memory of who he is. Soon a magical sword named Ara finds him and tells him that it will guide him to the truth about his identity. A flying squirrel thing named Fidget also arrives and informs him that she is the guardian of the blade, and will accompany him on his quest until he is done with the weapon. So Dust, Fidget and Ara adventure to a village that is being attacked by monsters, and then defeat the boss of the monsters, a creature named Fuse. Before he dies, Fuse reveals that he is a Moonblood, a creature from a race that is nearly extinct, having been largely exterminated by General Gaius, the evil ruler of the land. Dust then meets a girl named Ginger, who was once friends with Fuse and whose family helped the Moonbloods against Gaius. In a bid to expedite matters, I will skim through the story. It transpires through a series of quests that Dust used to be Gaius' close friend, Cassius. Cassius murdered Moonbloods, destroyed Ginger's village and slaughtered her family, but was brought down by Ginger's brother Jin, who perished at the same time, having been gravely wounded by Cassius. Dust was created by Moonbloods, a resurrection of sorts of Cassius and Jin, the body of Cassius but the soul of both. Their aim was to create a soldier who had the good heart to battle Gaius, but also had the combat skills to act on this will. With this knowledge, he fights alongside the Moonbloods to take out General Gaius, and then teases a sequel by dying. But not really dying. Of course, it sounds like Dust is the good guy when I put it all like this. In the terms that the game presents it to you, you've got the selfless heart of a boy who stood against injustice, versus the genocidal maniac who is trying to take out an entire species. And Dust does seem to try and do good. Granted, he isn't always successful, such as when he tried to save Bopo's father from the underground village of Mudpot.
He held on as long as he could, but it just wasn't enough.
Huh? Oh no! You can't go! Dust got the water running, he did! But we got the water running.
We failed, Fidget. We weren't fast enough. Damn it! We weren't fast enough!
But it makes him even more relatable. He tries to do his best to save the day, but like a real person, he sometimes comes up short. However, I do accept part of the responsibility for that particular failure, because I was just so busy doing all the other side quests first. But at least I was mostly helping others. And Dust does help people a lot. There's a whole load of side quests that see him selflessly help others. But to understand why Dust is not the hero, we have to look at what he's fighting for. He is, at his core, fighting for the defeat of General Gaius. But why? It is true that Gaius wants to kill the Moonbloods, and on its surface this seems quite inexcusable. Who would order the extinction of an entire species? But we have never seen Gaius' true motivation. He could be perfectly justified, but the game seems to make it a point not to explain it. In fact, when the game does show Gaius, we see that he is kind of level-headed, almost caring. When he finds out that Cassius might be alive and well, he's concerned for his friend. Even at the end, when Dust confronts Gaius, it is Gaius who calls off his guards and tries to enter into a dialogue. He certainly doesn't seem to act like the crazed despot the Moonbloods and Ginger speak of. And that's where Roman history comes in. Gaius, well, Gaius Caesar Germanicus, was the name of the famous Roman Emperor Caligula. The same Caligula who was said to be insane, a violent incestuous maniac who tried to appoint his horse consul. Or so they say. For, like Gaius in the game, the only historical evidence of Caligula's madness is from the likes of Suetonius, who didn't exactly inquire into the authenticity of an anecdote. Those juicy details, which could have been spread by his opponents, are unlikely to cast him in a favourable light, especially considering that his opponents grew weary enough of him to violently dispose of him, with an assassin named Cassius, who stabbed him to death shortly after his return from Gaul in the year 41, and so he returned to the game. A ruler named Gaius, an assassin named Cassius, and a biased group telling the assassin how evil the ruler is. The plot is entirely subjective. The narrative is told from the perspective of Gaius' enemies, who are naturally going to shed him in a negative light. While other games will show players the evil of the enemy regime, be it in cutscenes told from the villain's lair where they gloat about their plans, or in scenes where the innocents are brutalized by a villainous army, showing the player exactly what they're fighting against. Dust doesn't do this. Dust only shows Gaius reiterating that the Moonbloods need to be destroyed. But he doesn't gloat. To him it seems simply necessary. So as nobody in the game shows Gaius' side of the story, let us look at what we know about the Moonbloods, and put them under scrutiny. The Moonbloods are a race of lizard-like people who seem fine enough. They have, according to Elder Grey Eyes, been on the verge of extinction for many years, and Gaius is close to putting them over the edge. What put them near extinction we may never know. All that is known is that they follow the way of the flameless light, a form of magic without magic. However, the ancient Moonbloods, the Syntac, fell, and the Moonbloods became outcasts. It seems that the Moonbloods came from the Syntac, but split off some way down the line. Did the Syntac become extinct, or did something else happen? Well, I suspect that the Moonbloods were outcast from the Syntac, and that the Syntac technology progressed without the Moonbloods knowing. I say this because Gaius has access to Syntac technology, and magic that the Moonbloods were not aware of. The Moonbloods themselves say that they became outcasts, so that makes sense, and they do go by different names to the Syntac. But what created this distinction? I suspect it is necromancy, and my evidence is Dust himself. The Elder resurrected Cassius' body with no regard for the souls contained within, or that he was once again making Ginger come face to face with her family's killer. And it surely has some detrimental effect on her emotions, because she mentions that every time she sees Dust, she sees Jin's eyes. How painful must that be, to see your brother reflected in the eyes of his killer? And this is also the Moonbloods can use him as a weapon.
To defeat General Gaius and save our people, we would need a warrior capable of standing against an entire army. This warrior would also need to be pure.
Dust also starts the game with no memories, something that the Elder said was intentional.
You may possess the souls of two separate beings, but your body and mind are your own. You were created to save this world, so we felt giving you memories of either soul would simply distract you from the task at hand.
So, Elder Grey Eyes created a zombie slave, who he chose not to give memories to so that they wouldn't interfere in the mission. And the Elder admitting this gives us more food for doubt, because when Dust confronts and attacks Gaius, he says that he remembers everything. If Dust only got his memories back because the Elder returns them to him after he had completed most of his mission, what's to say that they're the correct memories and not a fabrication? What better way to get him to fight for their cause than to provide him with false memories, which must be well within his powers? But again you question, Dust helped people so he can't be bad. But would Cassius have refused to help them? We don't know. Gaius certainly doesn't act like the sort who would murder helpless people without cause. And Cassius was his best friend, whereas we do see Dust do that.
You dare speak to me of innocence when you have so casually slain a countless number of my children.
Your children? You're talking about those monsters back there?
Monsters.
What's the problem?
Well, you did say they were his children.
Children or not, they don't look all that happy to see us.
Hey, Ugly! Are you gonna play nice? There's just no pleasing some people.
It was a valiant effort, Fidget.
Dust knew that Fuse considered the monsters to be his children, and they weren't going to attack them, they were just standing back, but Fidget calls them ugly, doesn't wait for a reply, and then Dust smiles, seeing this as justification for more slaughter, when he could have just avoided combat altogether. And they can't use the monsters for justification for ending Gaius, because the monsters that attacked Aurora had nothing to do with him. They were sent by Fuse, a Moonblood driven mad by the armour used to keep him alive. The magic Moonblood armour. Lady Tethys caused problems in Mudpot because she was driven to rage by impending war. Again, she is seemingly angry at Gaius' forces, but both he and the Moonbloods are fighting, so her true allegiance comes into question. And now let us talk about Cora's husband Cain. He's the closest thing we have seen to proof of Gaius being genuinely evil. Cora tells us that he wasn't a nice person to be around, but of course that in itself isn't necessarily evil. The source of his income, however, was less sympathetic. He worked for Gaius, selling information about Moonbloods and sympathizers to his forces. But again, I must stress that this isn't necessarily evil when you consider once more what the Moonbloods are capable of. Nor is Cain's eventual apparent repentance a sign of Gaius' evil either. And then there's the merchant who is said to be tolerated by Gaius and his forces because he sells useful items. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but if Gaius' forces were as evil as is said, would they not have killed him on sight or kidnapped him for information? If Gaius is so truly driven by hatred and desire to wipe out the Moonbloods, why would he allow this one merchant to survive when obliterating the Moonbloods, and the trader in particular, would give him access to all the supplies the trader has? In fact, the only time we see Gaius' forces is near the end of the game. The first time is when they encounter Dust and are shocked to see Cassius's reanimated corpse, and so they attack him. They attack him to defend the honour of their dead, desecrated friend, which is a somewhat understandable reaction. I mean, you're not seen to be a bad guy for shooting the zombies in Resident Evil, are you? The other time is during the war against the Moonbloods, which, might I add, is sort of understandable when you're being attacked by an enemy force who wants to kill you. The Moonbloods aren't seen to take prisoners. They just make zombies. Yes, Gaius wants to wipe out the Moonbloods, but considering they are a species who use the dark arts to reanimate the friends of their enemies, it's not surprising. When you stop and think of it, using the image of, or indeed a brainwashed loved one, against your enemies is deliciously evil, and is a trope that has been used in movies in one way or another for some time. For example, in Mortal Kombat, where Shang Tsung takes on the appearance of Liu Kang's brother in an attempt to gain the upper hand in battle. Or in the Street Fighter animated movie, where M. Bison sends a brainwashed Ken to battle Ryu, who cannot bear to fight his friend. But now let us turn our attention to Ara, the sword. If we accept that the Moonbloods aren't as innocent as they claim, and that they created Ara, then we can look at what he says to Dust as subtle conditioning. Throughout the quest, he lets Dust know that he knows more than Dust does. He supposedly accidentally lets slip about how he might have two identities, and then occasionally says that Dust is doing the right thing, after Dust makes a choice. He never gives Dust any more information, but it makes Dust want to keep doing the right thing, whatever that is. Because Ara is his lifeline, the only person who seemingly knows the truth about his identity, and so he wants to please him. But did Dust ever have a choice? It might seem like an odd question. Dust can do whatever he wants in this world, but he consciously chooses to be a good guy. Except we don't know if he's being good, and the game never gives us, and by proxy Dust, any say in what we're doing. Could it be that Dust doesn't have any choice, really? He is being controlled by the Moonbloods, compelled to follow Ara's riddles, and the only thing that keeps their hypnotic control over him is not knowing who he is. The Moonbloods know that while he is confused, he is easily controlled. Being told that fighting Gaius is right, and then meeting Gaius' enemies, Ginger, the town of Aurora, Cora, they all confirm this. But the second he knows his identity, that he is both Cassius and Jin in one body, their spell is broken. We see how he struggles when he finds out the truth, unsure which soul to side with. But he sides with Jin. Why? Because the part of him that hates Gaius is now strong. It is convinced that Gaius is evil because everything that he has done so far to fight against Gaius is right. It is the correct path. Because everyone who hates Gaius said so. Because Ara said so. If Dust found out who he was beforehand, when Cassius and Jin were of equal strength in Dust's mind, had he not been conditioned, what would have happened? Once more, it's a subtle sign of the Moonblood's ploy, but then what of Fidget? Well, she's innocent. She is the keeper of the blade. She has arcane knowledge, but it's all useless to the quest. I think that this is why she breaks the fourth wall so much. She knows that the other worlds, other video games exist. She knows the secrets of the multiverse. But none of it has any impact on Dust's situation. And it's shown by her saying things that we know are true, that characters should save, that there's such a thing as leveling up and pressing buttons. It confirms that yes, she knows things, factual things, but they have no bearing on the story, and so she is the only person who is just as puzzled as Dust, and she's a loyal companion as a result. And speaking of the multiverse and other games, finally one last bit of evidence of the Moonblood's true motives, the hidden characters throughout the game. At first thought you might think it was Gaius who locked them up, but that doesn't ring true. As people say in the game, he is vicious. He kills and kidnaps. Gaius doesn't put prisoners in cages in obscure places. Consider this. If Dust is the only person in the game who has the abilities to obtain the keys, and to reach the places where the people are being held, then who put them there? Because some of them, such as Bastion and Fez and Braid Guy, are in locations that can only be reached through magical means, or through resonance gem doors. The resonance gems, in fact, seem like Moonblood technology, and the magic is very Moonblood specific. Even the locations of some of the other cages require abilities that only Dust possesses. Dust, the undead warrior of the Moonbloods. If only someone using Moonblood powers and Moonblood technology can access these areas, it certainly seems that perhaps the Moonbloods trapped them there. If only someone using Moonblood powers and Moonblood technology can access these areas, it certainly seems that perhaps the Moonbloods trapped them there. They couldn't kill these otherworldly beings for whatever reason, but they could trap them, and lock them away in locations that nobody else could ever get to. In cages whose keys were again scattered in places that only someone like Dust, or another Moonblood, could reach them. Why they did so, we may never know, but it's an interesting thought. What do the Moonbloods want? And why did it involve kidnapping characters from other realms? But enough of that, let us move to the end of the game, for even in the ending there is nothing but heartbreak. During the final battle, which takes place in the volcano by the way, Gaius is soundly defeated and clings to the rocks, calling for his friend Cassius. When Dust reaches him, Gaius sorrowfully concedes that Dust is no longer his friend, and he hurls himself into the lava.
You are, but Cassius is gone, as is the world we once loved. Cherish it.
Dust then also allows himself to be washed away by the lava. And that's pretty much the end. There is a funeral service of sorts, and we see Dust's spirit fly away as the Elder threatens to once again use his weaponized zombie when the time is right. Yes, the Moonbloods are basically Umbrella. Their boundless evil is confirmed. But in all seriousness, Dust on the surface seems to be an open and closed story of good versus evil. But, as in any form of analysis, we must question the provenance of the material. By this, I mean that we must inquire into the motivations of the sources, much as Suetonius didn't when he wrote about Caligula. Whenever fact-checking a source, it's a good practice to ask, who is telling you this? What are they telling you, and why are they saying it? In the case of the Moonbloods, they clearly want Dust to side with them, when, if left by himself, there is a good chance that he would side with Gaius. This throws the whole plot of the game into question, because Dust is the story of a man who has been brainwashed without even knowing it, to kill his best friend. Everything we see in the game, everything Ara says, the words spoken by the Anti-Gaius League are examples of the story's biased narrative, to the point that it even brainwashes us, and makes us believe that this is a story of justice rather than a tragedy. And in that sense, it's a cautionary tale. Through believing the Moonbloods, your actions in the game turn the political tide, tip the balance of power in a direction that may not actually be for the best, and all because you believed in the questionable stories of the misinformed villagers and the dishonest Moonbloods. Perhaps in looking at the game's plot through a critical lens, it is a reminder to apply these same standards to everything in our lives, from what our politicians and media tells us, to even something as lowly as a shop assistant trying to sell us goods. It doesn't take much for someone with a vested interest to spin even the most dreadful people into the greatest heroes, and turn saints into monsters. Perhaps in looking at the game's plot through a critical lens, it is an important reminder to apply these same standards to everything in our lives. All you have to do is ask who, what, when, where, and why, and you can change the world for the better. Unlike in Dust, where we just believed it all because it made sense, I suppose. And while Dust is just a video game, and so it doesn't matter who is good or bad in this story in the sense that the decisions you make don't have an effect in the real world, it's an important reminder to never take things at face value. Because the next person you trust might actually be an evil weaponized attack zombie. Or perhaps I've been talking bollocks this whole time.